This is Johannes Zukertort, one of the strongest players in Europe in the 1870s and 1880s. He played against Wilhelm Steinitz in the first official World Championship match in 1886. This is Grandmaster Stuart Conquest, 58 years old, currently playing in the British Championship in Liverpool. And this is Stuart at the grave of Johannes Zukertort, and he rediscovered that grave a few years ago and set up a campaign to actually have the grave restored to, well, its former glory in tribute to Johannes Zukertort. And in the penultimate round of the British Championship, Stuart was imbued with the spirit of Zukertort as he played the Zukertort opening. Let's take a look at this game because it was really something very special. In the penultimate round of the British Championship, Stuart Conquest faced Shreyas Royal, 16 years old, prodigy. Last year he became the youngest ever English Grandmaster. And going into this penultimate round, Shreyas shared the lead in the tournament with Michael Adams. But there was a chasing pack of players, but all to play for. So I want to take you through this game. It's absolutely fascinating. So Stuart, a very adventurous player, played b3. So he's looking to play something a little bit unusual to try and confuse Shreyas, who knows his openings very well. But Stuart, in his career, has never been afraid to play something a little bit unorthodox. c5, e3. So both players just feeling their way through. And now we transpose basically into a Queen's Indian. But who's playing the Queen's Indian? This is the funny thing. d4. Knight c6. Knight d2. So basically it's transposed now into the so-called Zukertort variation. I can't say it properly. The Zukertort variation. So that's where white plays just with e3 and d4 and then puts the bishops on d3 and b2. And this has little bursts of popularity now and again. Artur Yusupov was a great exponent of this line. It's very dangerous with these bishops raking across the board. But as we'll see, there are good defences for black. So both sides castle and b6. So very sensible. Black is going to put the bishop on the long diagonal. a3. At some point this is probably necessary as black wants to play knight b4 to push that bishop away. Bishop b7, yep, good development. And knight e5. Of course, the knight wants to go to the outpost. Supported by the pawn, supported by the bishop. And that also opens the diagonal for the queen. So it might appear on one of these squares at some point. And makes way for the f-pawn. Rook c8, f4. Well, Stuart loves attacking. So he goes with this pawn triad, supporting the knight. And yeah, makes room for maybe the rook to enter the game at some point. Well, we'll see. Knight e7, excellent move by Shreyas. I recommended this system actually a few years ago in, well, one of the chess-based downloads that I did on answering the various d4 systems for black. And I like this a lot. So the knight swings round and takes the f5 square a little bit more under control. But also it opens the diagonal, well, to some extent. You can see that there are now 1, 2, 3 pieces bearing down on that e4 square. So what black wants to do is plonk that knight on e4, which blocks out the bishop. And this knight might well land on f5 or maybe d5. So this is a very good defensive setup for black. Well, black wants to try and get the initiative as well. Also, it starts to open up the c-file. So knight e7, excellent move, and it's been seen in hundreds of games actually. So queen f3, I think that's necessary because white needs to cover that e4 square. So white now has these pieces guarding e4, so the black's knight can't land on e4. And b5, that's a really strong move, and yeah, again, I have recommended this in the past. So what black wants to do is just play c4 and push that bishop away. And taking that pawn isn't great because then black would be able to take here and take on c2. Well, you can see that's counterplayed straight away with black's rook breaking through on the second rank. So what did Stuart do now? I think he played the best continuation because c4 is difficult for white. So I think it's a good option to exchange on c5, and that opens up this long diagonal for the bishop. So both bishops looking really dangerous. Nevertheless, in taking on c5, white loses a bit of control in the middle with that d4 pawn disappearing and that bishop looking very good on this diagonal, and the bishop doesn't look too bad here. So it's a tale of two bishops. Which ones are stronger? These black bishops or these white bishops? I mean, both bishop pairs look really dangerous. I remember looking at this before, and there was a game between Stefanova and Ho Yifan that went queen h3, knight f5, and I think this shows what can happen when black takes the initiative. You know, those knights look really good. They shut out the d3 bishop. e3 is under fire. I think that looks really good. But Stuart played b4, pushing the bishop back, and then played knight b3. So he's taking some control over these squares. And this is the most popular continuation for white. But in fact, black has an excellent record from this position. And Shreyas plays knight e4. Excellent move. So that's very much following the plan. The knight hits the outpost, supported by pawn and bishop, and blocks out that bishop on d3, this really dangerous bishop. And Stuart played knight d4. So this knight sort of floats into the middle, looking at lots of squares, actually quite dangerous. I mean, both these knights look pretty good. Still a highly unclear position. There have been a few games played in this line from this position. Knight f5. Okay, this looks pretty solid. So that knight looking at d4 and e3. Rook d1 from Stuart. Okay, so the rook is opposite the queen. So black has to be very careful here because there could be some exchange here, f5 first, and then there's some kind of pin on the d file. So queen e7 played. This is a very tricky position. One way to play this, which might have been a bit simpler, is simply to take on d4 and then move the queen up. Because in that way, there are no tricks on the d file, no tricks, because this is now fixed. And that knight is very nicely supported. Queen e7 played instead, so the position is still quite fluid. But this is still absolutely fine for black. a6. So that's a bit of a slow move, but just protecting that pawn on b5. Queen shifts to h3. So, you know, that kind of lining up on h7 restricts the movement of those knights, but also threatening to take a pawn on f5. So the knight switch back to d6. So nice maneuvering, making sure that that knight is really well supported. So this bishop is shut out of the game. Got to watch out for that one. So Stuart decided, right, I'm just going to open things up. f5. Just looking to open lines. And this is very dangerous. Okay, so here is where I would like you to have a think. And I'm going to have a drink. What a complex position. I mean, it's absolutely burning. So many pieces on the board. White is attacking. What would you play as black here? Okay. Cheers. Black to play. In these kind of positions where there's so much interaction, captures are possible, attacks are possible, you have to calculate. Best idea is to eliminate that knight. So bishop takes d4, and if bishop takes d4, take on f5. So you can see that knight is doing a very good job of supporting the knight and the pawn. And this can be taken. But then rook takes c2. So the rook breaks through. And this is rock solid. Nothing's going to shift that. And I mean, these pieces are very active, but there's nothing going on. There's no real attack. Now, later on, it might be possible just to play f6 to push the knight out of the way and blunt the bishop. So that's better for black. Now, after bishop takes d4, there are some quite frightening moves here, actually. I mean, f6 is terrifying, just opening things up. So one would have to calculate that very carefully. In fact, black can take on f6 and there's no clear attacking continuation for white. Black should be winning that position, but it is very, very scary. Bishop takes knight is possible, but again, this is absolutely fine for black, and we've actually transposed. So the best move is just to try and eliminate some wood in the middle, take that knight, and then with a bit of luck take on f5 as well. But Shreyas played f6 instead. Now, this would also have involved a lot of calculation. So, for example, after bishop takes knight, I mean, this is very scary. But in fact, it's possible to take here. I mean, it looks a mess, but in fact, black is better here. These pieces are both attacked. And you can see the queen does a pretty good job on the 7th rank. You know, it's close enough to the king to defend, and the rooks are also connected. But there was a massive problem with f6. Knight g6. Attacking the queen, attacking a rook. And also that pawn on e6 is also still threatened. So really that had to be taken. But now queen h7 mate is threatened. So that's very unfortunate. Knight g5. It's hard to say what Shreyas missed, actually. Because this position also looks absolutely dreadful. It's just that knight defending the h7 square, but it's not hard to eliminate that piece. So let's see how Stuart did it. So Shreyas played rook d8, trying to make room for the king, and then knight f3, very simple move. So looking to eliminate that knight. And then, well, for example, after this, check and mate on h8, game over. So knight f7 played. That was taken. So if queen takes, then bishop g6 and then queen h7. So knight takes played. Queen h7 check. Now, what's the score? Well, white is... oh, it's actually even material. But white's pieces are absolutely fantastic. And not least that wonderful queen on h7. So finding a way through in this position with every single piece in an attacking position is not difficult. Knight h4. Threatening a massive fork on g6. King e8 played. Knight g6. And that was the final moves of the game. Black resigned. So why? Well, okay, let's have a look. Queen is attacked. If queen d6, then one could just do this and take a piece and continue the attack. That's the human way to play. My computer points out that queen g7 is even stronger. Fine. There's also knight g5, and now, well, a human way to win is simply to take material. Knight takes queen, take the rook, and white is a rook up. Or if you want to get flashy, then queen h5 is also very strong. But no, I think just taking material like this and you're a whole rook up looks like the simplest way to win the game. Wow, what a crushing victory. And it just shows how dangerous the Zukertort system is. And Stuart was clearly imbued with the spirit of Johannes Zukertort in that game. Wonderful stuff. How fitting for him. So that meant Stuart bounced up into the lead. Now let's take a look at the leading scores with one round to go. Well, it's an absolute pile-up at the top. 6 players sharing the lead going to the final round. So Nikita Vityugov plays white against Stuart Conquest. Michael Adams plays white against Maciej Chopor. Richard Pert plays white against Peter Roberson. They all have 6 points. It's going to be an absolute bloodfest in the final round. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. So I'll report back and let you know what happens in the final round of the British Championship.